Michael is with us again, and he is going to continue helping us to understand our emotional situation. What is happening to us here? How is it affecting us? And what can we do about it? So today especially, he's going to talk about grief. I don't have his expertise, so I can't predict what he will say, but I'm really glad that Michael is giving time again to encourage us and to help us with grief.
So, like Greg said, my name is Michael, and I'm going to be talking with you all about ways to cope with grief. So I always like to introduce myself in case there's anyone new in the group. I'm a therapist who lives in the United States. I work mostly with people who are going through really stressful situations, and I teach them ways to cope with their stress and just am there for them to help them get through the stressful parts of their life. And always like to talk about the trip that I took to Myanmar in 2016. I spent a couple months getting to see your beautiful landscapes and learn about your culture and just meet some really wonderful people. So Myanmar has a very special place in my heart. So my goals for tonight are first to help you understand grief. This is an English corner, so I want to help you understand what the word grief means and also give you ways to cope with your grief. And then also I know that right now in Myanmar, you all are going through so much, and just wanted to give you a chance to share your grief with each other. Also felt like at the beginning when we were kind of just getting to talk, I felt like people have very heavy hearts, like Greg said. So I just wanted to say again that there are people around the world who see what you all are going through. There are people who care very deeply about each and every one of you. And I know that we cannot fix the situation that you're in, but please know that there are people who care for you and who are praying for each one of you. So to start off with, what is grief? So the easiest way I could describe grief is that grief is the emotions you feel after losing someone or something important. You could describe it as a really strong emotional reaction after losing something that you love. Grief is a really normal part of life. It happens to each and every one of us, and it can come from many different events. Grief can happen after you lose a loved one, like a friend or a family member. Grief can come if you have to make a really big move or if you lose a job. Grief can come even if you lose a pet. So lots of things in life can make us feel grief. There are a lot of different ways that people experience grief. The most common way that people feel grief is by feeling sad. Also really normal to feel lonely, angry. You may feel sick. Sometimes grief can affect the way our body feels and the way that we feel physically. It's really normal to feel tired or to have problems sleeping. Maybe you have bad dreams or memories about the thing that you lost. Also, some people, when they feel grief, they feel numb. They really don't feel anything at all. But it's just important to remember that everyone's grief is different. And however you are feeling your grief, it's probably very, very normal. I also wanted to point out that grief in and of itself is not a bad thing. Even though grief doesn't feel very good, there are a lot of positive things that can come from grief. So it can help us become more caring. It can help us become kinder. A lot of times after we have been through grief, we are stronger people and we are more loving. So grief is not always a bad thing. But as I'm sure we all know, and we all have different things to grieve, grief can feel very, very strong and feel very, very big. And so I wanted to share with you some different ways that you can cope with your grief. Let me pull up the chat. Okay. So the first tip I will give you is when you are dealing with grief, it's important to keep taking care of yourself. Sometimes when we feel grief and it feels very, very big, we don't want to do the things we normally do in a normal day. However, it is very important now that you continue to exercise, keep eating healthy foods, taking a shower, getting a good night's sleep, even when you don't feel like doing it. Sometimes the way that we act can actually change the way that we feel. And so if we continue to take care of ourselves when we're feeling grief, it can help us to slowly start feeling better. So a next important part in dealing with grief is to accept what happened. Life can feel really different after losing someone or something important to you. And a lot of times we try to keep life the same. But if we're going to cope with our grief, we have to admit and accept that we have lost something. It doesn't feel very good to accept that we lost something that we love, but we have to do that before we can start actually coping with our grief and start getting better. The next tip is to acknowledge your pain. So you can think of grief like a wound that must heal. If you had a cut on your arm and you ignored it and said, "Oh, I'm fine, this cut on my arm doesn't hurt," there's a good chance that that cut would become infected, it would get bigger, and you would get really, really sick from it. The same is true with grief. If we ignore the pain that comes with grief, it can actually make us feel a lot worse in the long run. So I would encourage you to have courage as you acknowledge your pain and your grief. It can be so scary to admit that something that you hurt after losing something that you love. But this is a very important step if you're going to start healing from your grief. Also, grieving is best done when you share it with each other. So I would encourage you to grieve with others. Right now, you all are in a unique situation where everyone is probably feeling some sort of grief, and grief can feel a lot smaller when everyone shares it. I think one of our students said a couple of weeks ago that we can share our problems together, and that is a really, really good suggestion when it comes to grief. It can feel a lot smaller when you share it with each other. Okay, so another way to deal with our grief is to enjoy the memories you still have with the thing that you lost. So these happy memories can help us actually get through our grief. No matter what's happening now, nothing is going to change the happy moments that you had with the thing that you lost. And these memories have the power to still bring you a lot of joy. So to share an example of this, this is a picture of me and my dog, Odie. Odie was one of my very best friends, but a couple months ago, he got really sick and he actually died. So when I think of Odie, I feel very sad. I miss him a lot, and I wish Odie was still alive. But the happy memories I have of Odie still bring a smile to my face. They still make me very, very happy. And so I'm still able to enjoy these memories I have with my dog. And yeah, they help me a lot when I miss him and when I feel grief. There's a quote I really like that says, "Grief is simply love persevering." These happy memories are a sign that you still have love for the thing you lost in your heart, and this love can help you get through your grief. Okay. Also encourage you guys to remember that one day grief will end. You can think of your grief like a wave in the ocean. If you've ever been to the ocean and have seen a wave, you know that it can get bigger and bigger and bigger until it hits the shore, and eventually it goes back out to the ocean. You can think of grief in the same way. A lot of times grief will build until it feels bigger and bigger, and then one day, when your grief has been very, very big, it will start to feel smaller and smaller and smaller. So be patient. Remember that one day your grief will end. And last week I shared some about my faith in the living God, and this is really important to me. And so I wanted to share it all with you because it's so important to me. There's a verse from the Bible that I really love that says, "One day the living God will wipe every tear from our eyes. Death will be no more. Grief, crying, and pain will be no more because the previous things have passed away." So what this verse is saying, that people who believe in the living God, one day he's going to live with them. He's going to wipe away every tear they've ever cried, all their grief, all their crying, all the pain of this world will be no more. And so this really helps me when I'm going through something difficult or when I'm grieving, to remember that one day the living God will be with me and that my grief will go away forever. It is Easter Sunday, like Greg was saying. And so if you're interested in learning more about the living God or the Easter story, I think they have the Knowing Jesus class right after this, correct?
Later this
afternoon at 3:30.
This afternoon at 3:30. Okay, great. So that might be helpful for you as you're trying to work through your grief. So I would encourage you all to check that out. It might be helpful for you, just like it's helpful for me. So last week, someone asked the question, I think they said, I have these emotions that I want to share, but I don't know how to express them. And that's a really, really good question. It can be really difficult to share your emotions and to share your grief with each other. So I thought of a couple suggestions on different ways to do that. First, if you're someone who likes to write, you could write about your grief. Sometimes writing things down can help you express your emotions. Maybe you could draw a picture of the thing that you're grieving, or maybe write a song or play music. It's also really helpful if you will have someone ask you questions about your grief. Sometimes if you're able to talk about your grief with another person and they're asking you questions about it, that can be a really good way to express your emotions and to share your grief. Okay, so just to review here, the main points of this talk were, first, remember to take care of yourself when you're going through grief. Accept what has happened and that life is different now. Be brave and acknowledge your pain. Don't grieve alone, but share your grief with others. Remember to enjoy the happy memories that you still have with the thing that you lost. And also remember that one day your grief will end. So I wanted to make sure that you left this talk with something that you could do, that you could try this week that might be helpful for you. So here are a couple of suggestions of ways that you could cope or process your grief this week. So first, if you have a loved one that you trust, like a friend or a family member, talk to them about your grief for 5 minutes. Ask them to listen to you and ask you questions as you're talking about your grief. Then switch roles. After you've shared about your grief, you listen to that person share about their grief. You could also try writing a song, a story, or a poem about your grief. You could create a list of ways that you have changed, both good and bad, because of your grief. And my personal favorite would be to write down happy memories you have about the thing that you're grieving, just in an effort to remember all the happy memories that you still have with the thing that you lost. Okay, so I'll end my talk with a quote, and it says that grief is not a sign of weakness. It is part of losing something you love, and the only cure for grief is to grieve. Yeah, so if you have been feeling grief recently, that is okay. That does not mean that you are weak. It is a part of life and losing something that you love. And I would guess you all have lost something that you love recently. And even though it is difficult, the best way to cure your grief is to be brave